This podcast is sponsored by nobody. Hey dudes, welcome to Splat from the Past, the only 80s themed horror sci-fi show where things can get totally radical. Now, I am so friggin' excited for today's show because I will be interviewing my second Saturday Night Live cast member and also second from the same era, the Eddie Murphy and Joe Piscopo era. And I am talking about Gary Kroeger. Gary, oh my God, from 1982 1985, he was on the show, and he made a name for himself playing characters like El Dorco, and Dwight McNamara and Ira Needleman. He started out in the practical theater. That was the name of the improv group with Brad Hall and Julia Louis-Dreyfus at Northwestern University. And he was on from 82 to 85 during, the Dick Ebersol era with Murphy and Piscopo. And man, so many great icons hosted Saturday Night Live in that era. And it's too many to name, during this intro, but we're going to get into that today. He also got to star in the TV Disney movie of the week, The Return of the Shaggy Dog. He had a small part in Christopher Guest's The Big Picture. He starred in a very funny but very politically incorrect comedy called Man Called Sarge, which was a military comedy for Cannon. He was in the Radioland Murders. He went into politics. He ran in 2016 and lost. And he has a podcast that I just started watching on YouTube, The Gary and Kenny Show, which is available on YouTube and all the podcast platforms. And we're going to have a great conversation today, and I can't wait. Ian from English told me that he's a really nice guy and one of the nicest guys he's interviewed. And I trust Ian, especially when it comes to comedy, so I just cannot wait, as I said once again. So yeah, here is my interview with Gary Kroeger.
Good morning.
Good morning, Gary. Welcome to the show. How are you today, sir?
I'm good.
This is such a great honor. Thank you so much for taking the time today, sir.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Certainly don't call it an honor.
Oh, it is.
The honor is mine. Is my audio okay?
Oh,
I'm just talking through the phone. It's okay. Great.
It's
great.
Perfect. This is an honor for me, I'll tell you.
Well, you're kind.
Going back in time, did you gravitate toward acting early on in your childhood?
It's an interesting question, Tommy, because I've never thought of anything else. I wasn't one of those just completely driven people. I lived a very normal life in the Midwest and, did everything that kind of a normal Midwestern kid could do. And certainly show business is not part of, it's not really one of the available industries in Iowa. But for some reason, I just gravitated to the early comics on television, Red Skelton, Dick Van Dyke.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to be like that. That led me to doing a lot of theater when I was in high school. I mean, literally everything that I could possibly perform in, I did. And I developed some talent, I guess, because I never questioned that was the career that I was going to go into, even though, like I said, it's... the only entertainment career that you look at here is to maybe be the local weatherman. And so, the other options didn't seem viable, but I always knew that I'd leave Iowa and, my life took me to Chicago, New York, and LA.
But did you at least know that you were funny, and did you come from a funny family?
No, I'm from the least funny family in the world. They were all academics and scientists and mathematicians and school teachers. But I was always funny. I don't know where that comes from. I think early in life, I discovered the gratification of making people laugh. I mean, it might have been falling down in front of the Avon lady. I'm not sure. But somewhere early, because it's as long as I can remember, I enjoyed... not having people laugh at me, but people laugh because of something that I said or did. I think I see that turn on in lots of children. When I've got two sons that, of course, I raised from birth. And so I saw the light turn on in their eyes when they realized they could entertain people. It can happen very early.
Right, absolutely. I mean, sometimes the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree.
Right. Well, my youngest is starting college next week, and he's going into music. My oldest started in theater, but now has moved toward family therapy. But then again, there's a little bit of show business in every occupation, right? I mean, you could be a lawyer and you still have to put on a good performance in front of that jury. I find the skills of any performer to be useful in anything. The presentation of ideas. It's sort of a taken for granted profession, I think, that's not taken seriously. But in truth, I can't think of a thing. I was in advertising for 17 years, and I was constantly selling ideas, and the performer in me made that more effective. I'm rambling now, but I find my point is this, Tommy. I find entertainment, I find acting to be much more noble than people think of it as. Oh, yeah. Usually. It's not just a comic who makes people laugh, it's someone who makes you think.
Marlon Brando said when he was on the Dick Cavett show, he said, we act every day to save our lives. And he gave so many examples, and they were all right on the money.
I totally agree. Totally agree. So when you have that skill, it can lend itself in so many ways. And I tend to think that I have the love of turning people on. I mean, in the sense of seeing their eyes light up to think about something, or simply to forget about something, to laugh. And that's really been the ingredient of my life that I think keeps me relatively youthful in my many, many years on the planet.
Mm-hmm. So after high school, you attended Northwestern University. That's where you met Brad Hall?
That's where I met Brad and his wife, Julia Louis-Dreyfus.
Right.
But others, that I always like to mention, like Paul Barras, Dana Olson, Rush Pearson, Mike Spound, Shelley Goldstein. I mean, just so many people who have gone on to have lucrative careers in the business. We were all friends in college with no idea where it was going, except that we loved to do it.
Yeah, so like you guys all became fast friends, and you all had like a chemistry, and you knew that you had something.
Our chemistry was the fact that I know this is going to sound arrogant, but I guess it is. We were all intelligent. We were all paying attention. We were all politically active. And you find those people that you can sort of align your values with, your moral directives with. And if you all also enjoy being on stage, you just naturally create intelligent comedy. I think that our niche was that we were very silly, very physical, but very intellectual as well. And so we found each other, and it really was the battery that created a lot of careers.
Were you guys like listening to National Lampoon and Firesign Theater and all those people?
Well, yes. Monty Python, I would have to say, to my generation, because most of us are in our 60s now from that group, Monty Python preceded us, but it was mythic. I mean, we could all quote everything, every sketch, every piece of dialogue from Monty Python. I, as a boy in high school, also loved a Firesign Theater. Yeah. The fact that Phil Proctor became my friend is a big deal in my mind.
I've talked to Phil, great guy.
Yeah, and but Firesign Theater I loved as well. I wasn't as aware of National Lampoon until the movies started coming out. Uh-huh. I know that was the Harvard Lampoon is where it all came from. But going to Northwestern, we weren't all about Harvard. So I just really wasn't aware of it until actually I got to New York and realized that everybody, Chris Guest and everybody, and Bob Tischler were all from the Harvard Lampoon.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people became aware of National Lampoon when the movies came out because it was it was something that, that the magazine got passed around and the albums got passed around like to college kids and stuff.
Exactly. So I've certainly since become a fan, and I've since got plenty of the magazines. I can't say that but look, I grew up on Mad Magazine, which was really, in a way, a precursor to all of it.
Oh, yeah.
Was like, oh, look, something's absolutely zany and irreverent that speaks to my generation. Now, I look back and it's very dated humor. It's a little obvious, maybe. But it was the first magazine out there that made an effort to not care about the establishment and to care only about its readers, or at least that's how we perceived it. So really, in a way, I was weaned off Mad Magazine.
Right. So after, let's see what happened. Dick Ebersol and all the talent coordinators show up to Second City in Chicago, and Del Close tells them to go next door to see the Practical Theater, and that's how you guys got cast, right?
Pretty much, yeah. Pretty much. You never, even when you're inside on the story, you never get all the details correct. Because I hear different versions of it. Was it Del who said that? I had heard that Del or Bernie Sahlins wasn't really all that fired up about their main stage show at the time. And they told Dick Ebersol and Bob Tischler, oh, go to the kids next door. They're doing what you're looking for. All I know is on a Saturday night, we did a show called the 50th Anniversary, Golden 50th Anniversary Jubilee, which was a collection of our best sketches over the previous 3 or 4 years. And it was a great show that night. And then we're told that Dick Ebersol, Bob Tischler from Saturday Night Live wanted to talk to us at their hotel on Sunday. So we said, yeah, okay, sure, why not? We went in, and they said, basically, can you be in New York in 2 weeks? That's what I remember. Now, that being said, I have this little piece of revisionist history here. I did, for a fact, send SNL an audition tape that I was asked to put together by my agent in Chicago. So I know that several weeks preceding all this, I sent them something goofy, but nobody ever said, oh, yeah, Kroeger, it was that goofy tape that brought us in. But clearly we got onto SNL's radar. And the nature of the physical and, again, cerebral comedy that we were doing, I think, said to SNL that we had elements that were very much like the original concept of SNL.
Yeah.
That's the best part of the story, because it's exciting to get hired to be on national television, and suddenly you're going from maybe making $1.50 to put gas in your car to making a salary where you can live in New York. But the truth is, Eddie Murphy's career was just about to skyrocket. Joe Piscopo was a solid star of the show. We didn't get a whole lot to do, especially in that first year. And that could be frustrating. That could be very frustrating.
Yeah, I've talked to Robin Duke. She got there the year before you guys. And, I love this era of the show because I used to watch it on Comedy Central in the 90s. They would show marathons of this era. And, my big regret is not recording a lot of them because they were just great. But was it difficult for you, replacing the original cast?
Well, we didn't actually have to replace the original cast because they were gone in 1980 or 79, 80.
Yeah.
And then there was the Domanian year, which was not considered a successful year. I think toward the end of that, though, they did have Joe Piscopo and Eddie Murphy, who were sort of featured players. Dick Ebersol came in to save the day the next year, I guess we're talking 81, and he knew to keep Eddie and Joe. So he then had a year where he built a cast that included Robin and Tim Kazurinsky and Mary Gross. Mm-hmm. I think Christine Ebersol was in there, no relation to Dick, by the way, and Eddie and Joe. And that got the show back on the map, particularly because of the emerging presence of Eddie Murphy and, to a large extent, Joe Piscopo. But even still, they thought they didn't have the dangerous chemistry that they were looking for. So that's why they went out looking for something dangerous, and they found us and hired us in the fall of 82. That being said, it lit a fire, I think, a little bit with Eddie Murphy to where, he didn't want to be replaced already, or not replaced, but have so much competition already that he really made it clear. Now, he didn't do so aggressively, but the show made it clear that Eddie was the star, Joe was the co-star, and the rest of us would just sort of have to find our way.
Yeah. Who's your favorite host when you were there?
For me, it was Howard Hessman, because he came from the committee, and even though his career was Dr. Johnny Fever on WKRP, he came from improv background, improv on the street. And so he was very easy to work with. He didn't like to use cue cards, and I didn't like to use cue cards. So we memorized a couple of sketches that we did together. And that for me, and I think that was my first year there, was a real highlight for me. I loved Christopher Reeve in later years. I loved Ringo Starr, simply because it was Ringo Starr. And there were lots. I mean, Michael Keaton was great, but it wasn't a great show. We didn't give him a great show, but he was just a terrific guy, and a real player. He really came to do the work, and you appreciate those kind of people.
He came back in the early 90s, and they did a slightly better show with him, Yeah, I mean, you guys got to have some comedy icons there. I mean, you had Jerry Lewis, Don Rickles, Sid Caesar, Joan Rivers, the Smothers Brothers, Flip Wilson. That must have been intimidating to have all those giants.
It was. I thought Flip Wilson was very accessible. The Smothers Brothers, very accessible, no attitude, came to work, considered us all equals. When it came to like Sid Caesar and Jerry Lewis, they knew we were all in awe of them. Mm-hmm. They'd earned their chops. They'd earned their pedigree. So they weren't all that interested in, hanging out with us or feeling like we were the up-and-coming new stars. I didn't feel close to them at all. I didn't have anything to do on those shows, but, I watched them. I marveled at what they had done in their lives, but I didn't find them to be particularly great hosts.
Yeah. Who was your least favorite host?
Well, there's nobody I didn't like. I mean, Nick Nolte came and then quit by midweek because he got intimidated.
Wow.
So I can't say he was a particularly good host, but Eddie came to the rescue and hosted his own show.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. I don't have... Robert Blake was not very friendly to me.
Yeah.
But then again, I don't hold it against him. He was just doing what he does and who he is in the moment. But he wasn't a lot of fun for me. But the truth is, I actually got to know him a little bit after the show, many years later in L.A. Mm-hmm. And but there's a book that's out about the hosts that have been banned from the show, and Robert Blake is one of them. And the story they tell is how he threw a script in my face, which is true. But I didn't take it as personally as the story implies.
Right, yeah.
I just said, hey, that's how show business people behave. Big deal.
Oh, yeah, he did stuff like that to Stephen J. Cannell when he was on Beretta and stuff.
Yeah, right. That's who he was. I just figured, I guess he didn't like my script. Okay, fine. I didn't lose sleep over it.
Yeah, Ann Beats told me before she passed that the worst host when she was there in the 70s was Louise Lasser.
I heard that was not a good show. Of course, that's the old days. But yes, I heard that wasn't particularly good. I'm trying to think of others. Like I said, I wasn't particularly fond of Jerry Lewis or Sid Caesar, just because they weren't that personable.
Yeah.
But I've always felt so lucky to be there, period, that I had no reason to gripe. Not every musical act was a winner either, but I was still there in what seemed like the biggest show on earth.
Yeah, you got any good Andy Kaufman stories?
Well, only in that he was a very soft-spoken, sweet, and gentle guy. So we did this thing where Andy was voted live by the audience as to whether or not he should come on the show again or be banned forever. And I was the person who announced at the end, well, Andy, you've been uninvited to Senate Live. You'll never be on the show again. I thought it was all a bit that was going to lead to some crazy Andy Kaufman sketch or character. You know, that made sense, right? I thought, okay, this has all been fake. Here I am on the inside, and I thought, I'm announcing that he'll never be on the show, but he's going to come out as another kind of character.
Yeah.
Well, that never happened. And what I heard later was that he was genuinely hurt by the fact that he was voted off, as anyone would be. But I realized, it wasn't a bit. It was this real gimmick to see if he'd come on again, and the audience voted him off. And what I heard was he was hurt, and that made me feel very, very bad. And then, you know, he died not that long after, not from a broken heart, believe me. He died of cancer, but I always felt bad that at the end of his career or his life was this downer for him. And I sort of had a front seat to it, so I've never felt great about that.
Yeah, that was during the Jerry Lawler feud, and around that same time, he created the fracas on Fridays, like him and Michael Richards got into a fight or something.
Well, I thought that's what this was all, and maybe it was in the works. You know, we didn't, as just a run-of-the-mill cast member, we weren't in on the machinery of what was going on. I just was told, hey, Kroeger, you're going to say the good nights. Here's the tally. Tell Andy he lost. Okay. Yeah. But I never thought it was a great event or bit anyway.
Yeah.
But here's what I can tell you. He was a soft-spoken, sweet guy.
Yeah. That's what many people tell me, that he was a soft-spoken, sweet guy, and still unpredictable. You never knew what he was going to say or do.
Right. Which was magic. Yeah. I mean, we loved Andy Kaufman. I revered him. He was the anti-comedian. I mean, he was remarkable. So I wish that my experience had been more upbeat and uplifting, or I wish I'd been involved in something more positive with him.
Yeah, because you got to see him right at the height of his fame, the peak of his powers.
Yeah.
And at that time, too, stand-up comedians would come on and do 5 minutes if there wasn't enough sketches. There was Harry Anderson, Stephen Wright, Joel Hodgson.
Joel Hodgson, yeah.
And then when Lorne came back, Sam Kinison was like the last comic to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I looked at SNL. SNL has taken on many different lives. Mm-hmm. It's always been SNL. It's always been a live hour-and-a-half show. But it's always been formatted around sketches. But every era, and I consider my period there a specific era, had a different construction of the show. I felt that we were more of a variety show than a satirical comedy show. In fact, we didn't do that much satire.
Right.
It was a bit clownish. But then when there would be a musical act and a stand-up act and some sketches and impersonations, I looked at it as a variety show more than a comedy show. Now when I watch the show, it's much more of a satirical sketch show. Mm-hmm. As I suppose it was in the beginning, but it evolved. It evolves into different characterizations of itself.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's a great way to put it. It's taken on many lives, and it's always been accessible to people who love comedy as well. Where did some of your characters come from, like Dwight McNamara and Ira Needleman and El Dorco?
Well, interesting you should ask. They all come from me. Dwight McNamara is actually how he was this character that I just made up. Because, when I was a kid, in school, you had film strips. They were 8mm or 16mm film strips played on a Bell and Howell Filmosound 3000, and they would be lectures in, how welding began, or, lectures in how to drive a car or whatever. And the loop would always come out to where it didn't sync up with the picture, and it would like this.
Yeah.
And the music would be. So I just learned to sort of, better than I can do now, speak in that character. So I would be introduced as the narrator of all those educational films that you've seen at school. Kids, give a big hand to Dwight McNamara. And I'd come out with a conservative suit and the horn-rimmed glasses, like that.
Yeah.
One joke theme, but I did it, I think, 3 or 4 times. El Dorco was based on the nerd side of myself. I've always known people, not myself, but around me have always been people who got bullied in school. And I have always had an affinity. I could get in touch with my inner nerd and feel their pain. And so I created this character a long time ago that I named El Dorco, just a nice guy that bobs through life, but everybody picks on him. But the moral in each one is that he always wins. He always gets the girl or whatever it is. So that's
Jamie
where that came from.
Yeah.
Jamie Lee Curtis. I made out with Jamie Lee Curtis. I mean, come on, I win, right?
Yeah.
And I'm being fought over by Mary Gross and Julia Louis-Dreyfus in one sketch. So that was the simple premise of that, but just the way I perceive the nerdy side of me to be. And Ira Needleman was pretty much the same character. It's pretty much the same idea, but a nerdy dentist who puts together a killer rock video to win a video date.
Yeah. Oh, MTV was just starting when you came on, and you guys were making fun of it. I mean, Julia Louis-Dreyfus was doing Nina Blackwood, and I interviewed Nina Blackwood, and she was like, I never said hot. I never said that. And I said, Jimmy Cagney never said you dirty rat, so you're in good company. You rat. right. And Cary Grant never said Judy either. These things get made up. Yeah, Julia made up hot. But it became known with Nina Blackwood. Yeah, I always wondered how she felt about that. Julia made that up. She thought she did a really good impression of her, but she just thought, I never said hot.
That's so funny. That's funny.
Yeah, some of my favorite sketches of that time include Winston University. If you tell anyone, we will find you and we will kill you.
And we will kill you. I thought, I was just a student in that. I mean, I just really sat there but I thought that was one of the most perfect and perfectly executed sketches in the entire time I was there. Yeah. I thought Billy was masterful. I thought the premise was hysterical.
Yeah.
Jim Belushi was funny. I just thought that was a perfect sketch.
Yeah. The Superman audition sketch, I think, is brilliant.
That's a favorite of mine. I rigged my own joke there with the chairs and falling into getting shot by the bullet and dying a gruesome death.
It's a perfect fall you do. Perfect fall.
Well, I've always, that came from doing practical theater, the group of guerrilla comedians with me and Brad and Julia. I was very good. We all were at physical comedy. So this called for something that would really look like I got shot. And so I just set up these chairs, metal folding chairs, in a way that when I fell into them, I could absorb the impact but make lots of noise. So I was very proud of the fact that I could physically make that work.
Yeah, that is just so perfect. When Ron Howard hosted, there was a sketch where everyone in the hospital talked like Sylvester the Cat.
Yeah, that's right. I was in that one. Yes. Suffering succotash, or whatever it was.
You guys all looked like you were trying so hard not to laugh because you were all spitting,
we're spitting on each other. That's what I remember. And then what happens is, it's live. Yeah. So part of the devilish side of you goes, if I can make Ron Howard or Brad or anybody laugh on live television, I win. So I started to sucker like that, and I would see the globules on Ron Howard's face, and he would put them right back to me. And yes, it became a war of spit.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Brendan Tartikoff and Eddie are dressed the same. Oh, God, that kills me every time I see it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, it's so funny because you're right. It's every year is peppered with these iconic, memorable, beautiful moments. I can look at a year and go, well, that was frustrating. I didn't get to do that much. I didn't emerge or anything like that. But then when I really zero in on what I was able to experience, the only television performance of Queen, for heaven's sakes, in a situation like this.
Yeah.
I was there. You know,
Yeah.
I was there when Tina Turner came out with Ed Grimley and danced. I was there when Ringo Starr came out and was auctioned off at a Beatles auction.
Yeah.
You know, I had a front row seat to the emergence of Eddie Murphy. I mean, that's incredible when I think about it.
Oh, absolutely. And also Ed Koch hosted.
Loved Ed Koch. Loved Ed Koch. And my mother and my grandmother came out for that show. Mm-hmm. And Ed Koch, and I don't mean in a romantic way, but my grandmother was this sweet little old lady, and Ed just thought that she was the nicest woman in the world. The mayor of New York, Ed Koch, and my grandmother shared letters until they died. Nice. After that, which was really meaningful and speaks to the character of Ed Koch. He didn't just say, "Oh, thank you for, you know, being a nice little old lady." No, they stayed in touch, which I thought was remarkable.
Yeah. Well, he was gay, wasn't he?
Yes.
Yeah. So he had that sensitivity about him. So yeah. I'm not too surprised about that. Stevie Wonder hosted. That had to have been a challenge to have a blind host.
Well, he did that hysterical film commercial for Canon cameras playing tennis with Joe Piscopo, and it was hysterical. But during the sound check on Thursday, Stevie Wonder's up there, you know, checking out the piano and checking the levels and things like that. Brad Hall and I are sitting out there, and I remember Stevie said, "Stop. Just roll some recording tape," because a song was going through his head, and he wanted to get it down on the piano while he was there. I couldn't tell you what the song was at this moment, but I thought, oh my God, I'm witnessing Stevie Wonder lay down a track that's in his head. Yeah. And that's a pinch me moment. That's a pinch me moment.
Yeah, Piscopo tells the story in his stand-up about him and Eddie going to see Stevie live like the next night, and he puts both of them on stage, and like Piscopo is singing along in the style of Sinatra, and the whole band stops, and he says, "Eddie's staring at me, Stevie's staring at me."
That's funny.
Oh yeah,
funny.
Oh yeah, remember the Cottonland sketch?
Yes,
that was funny.
Yes.
I talked to Ed Asner before he passed. He told me he didn't like hosting, and I don't know if he was being facetious, but he said he looked too fat during his monologue.
Well, I think he's being sincere. Not that I thought he looked fat, but I think that I thought he was a terrific host. I thought that he was a really easy guy to get to know and to talk with. Yeah. He loved, you know, he comes from Second City or the precursor to Second City. You know, he is an old improv actor back with Alan Arkin.
Oh, yeah.
So this was not a foreign place to him in terms of, but his career had been so different for so many years. I think at this point he felt a little bit out of shape or whatever. Yeah. But he was delightful to work with.
Yeah, he told me he didn't remember Mary Gross playing Mary Tyler Moore because, you know, I love that impression. I think she did her.
Oh, she was great.
Right on, yeah. But then again, he did have a complicated relationship with Mary Tyler Moore, so I'm not surprised he didn't remember.
Perhaps.
I do have to correct you, though. He told me Alan Arkin got there right after he left. He was actually there. He was actually there with Nichols and May.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. But it goes back to the pre-SNL, pre-Second City days. Because I was surprised because he was always Lou Grant, right?
Oh, yeah.
To realize that, he was a sketch improviser. Like, holy moly.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They were the Compass Players, they were called.
The Compass Players, of course, yes.
Do you remember the sketch where Carlin and Crystal are father and son cops?
I don't. I don't.
Oh, my God. So I was interviewing George Carlin's daughter last year, and she didn't even remember that. And I've seen it so many times. I think he should have been Emmy nominated and won because he was so good, because it was a dramatic piece that they were doing. It was kind of like that piece where Eddie Murphy and Louis Gossett Jr. are father and son. It was kind of like that.
I recall.
Yeah.
Well, George Carlin was another fond memory for me because I didn't have a lot to do on that show except I was on a news piece and they let him anchor the news. And I came out and did a thing that's fairly popular called spot bleeding, where I'm science editor or something, and I come out and I'm complaining about a condition that no money, there are no foundations looking at spot bleeding, and I was a spot bleeder. And meaning there were like spots where I just hurt and bled all over my body. And George turns to me and says, "Kroeger, is that a new shirt?" I go, "Yeah." "But you got to take the pins out of it, right?" Now, I knew that he was going to, that was all that was all written. But then at the very end, he said, "You're a moron, Kroeger," which he just ad-libbed out of nowhere. But to have George Carlin turn to me and say, "You're a moron, Kroeger," is just such a memorable, I'm so proud of that. I'm so proud to have been spontaneously insulted by George Carlin.
Incidentally, the Howard Cosell episode was the last episode of the season because a writer's strike happened, right?
Howard did the Cosell show. Yes, that's correct. And that had Run, Throw, and Catch Like a Girl Olympics, and Larry David is in that one. He's one of the judges.
I interviewed one of Greg Kinn's band members, and he told me how fun that was and how fun Howard Cosell was.
Howard was great. Worst toupee in the world, but great.
Yeah. John Candy and Eugene Levy were supposed to host the next week, and then Letterman was supposed to follow, and then Piscopo was going to host the finale, but then it didn't happen, sadly.
Correct. Well, Levy and not Levy, but Candy and Rick Moranis did host the show somewhere in there. Because we had split studios, because whenever it was election time, and they'd use 8H as, the central area for an election, so that would be 84, I guess. We had to split studios. So I remember Candy and Rick Moranis in there somewhere. And so was Carlin, for that matter, I think, was in a split studio show.
Candy should have been a member of the Five Timers Club, but I think because he didn't do Three Amigos, I think Lauren held a grudge there or something.
Is that right? You might be right.
I think so. Yeah, but
you might be right.
But that time that he hosted in '83, that was the only time Candy hosted.
Okay.
Yeah, and he was supposed to be. He was. He auditioned to be a not ready for primetime player, but he didn't make the cut. Then.
I don't think I knew that.
Yeah.
I mean, he's so iconic with SCTV, and even on SNL, we revered Second City Television. Flaherty and Marty, who of course came over to do the show, but Catherine, all of those, Robin, they were just John and Gene, and I mean just that was the bar as far as I was concerned. That was the high bar of satirical television.
And Harry Shearer, he came back and left early in the season, right?
Yes, Harry is brilliant.
Yeah,
Harry's not easy to work with.
Yeah.
Well, he has a very high standard, and chances are he is the smartest guy in the room. Yeah. But that doesn't make the smartest guy in the room the most. It doesn't really ingratiate oneself. Mm-hmm. And Harry didn't. He did not suffer fools. I got along with him fine. I think he kind of thought I was funny. He used me as sort of a prop in several sketches, but that's because he liked me. Yeah. But Harry was difficult.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. What was it like working with George Hamilton on Spies?
I loved George. I loved him to death. I did the pilot with Tony Curtis, and my character was a little less of a nerd than in the series that I did with George. But the pilot got picked up, but either Tony didn't test well or the network just didn't feel strongly about him. Mm-hmm. So they started over, and they had a deal with George Hamilton, and they said, let's make him a real playboy, James Bond plus whiskey kind of super spy. And then we'll cast the role of his neophyte sidekick, Ben Smythe was the name, as someone really, really nerdy, so it can't be Kroeger. Well, I went to the producers. I said, hey, I did the pilot. You guys said you really liked me. Yeah, but we're changing the role. And somebody said, you look too much like George Hamilton, to which I said, nobody looks too much like George Hamilton except George Hamilton. So I don't buy that. But what I did was I got an audition. I dyed my hair so that it wasn't even dark like George's. I put on glasses, and I created a much nerdier character. The network bought it hook, line, and sinker. And if I may name drop a little bit, I screen tested along with some other actors. Tim Busfield is one of the other actors.
Oh, yeah.
And Elizabeth Taylor was there because they were dating at the time. but she was just over there in the wings, and I screen tested with George, and I am told by George that she said, he's the one. You guys have a chemistry.
Oh.
So I thought that was amazing. So we did a half a season on the series. I loved it. It went up against a juggernaut called Kirk Cameron's series, Growing Pains, which was a huge hit. So nobody watched us. We got canceled, but George and I remained lifelong friends. I years later, produced his television show with his ex-wife, Alana Stewart, and we had another year of just absolute fun and joy and hanging out.
Oh, that's great. That's very rare too, especially with
very rare.
A big star of his caliber.
Well, since I left the business, though, 20 years ago, I've been in touch with George once or twice since, but, those days are over, and we don't really hang out. We certainly don't hang out, but we don't stay in close touch. He doesn't answer his emails when I send them, so the ship has sailed, but we were good friends.
My earliest memory of you was the return of the Shaggy Dog.
Oh, well, that happens to be a favorite of mine, and I'm still friends with all those people. In fact, Todd Waring and I stay very, very close. My brother, Moochie, of course, in the series.
I've talked to Cindy Morgan, Jim McCrell, and
Cindy,
Callan.
I love Cindy. Yes, I love them all.
They all have praised you as a comedy genius.
Oh, well, then they were drinking heavily or something. But we were all very good friends. It was a truly enjoyable experience. I doubt that you remember, but the very last scene is I get married to Betty, right?
Right.
Well, we shot that first, or in the first week. Well, like I told you, I'm a very physical actor, so we're supposed to run around the house. The camera picks us up in the backyard, but there was a bush there. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, it would be great if Wilby just leaps over the bush. Well, it was a fake bush covering a giant hole. So my leg and my foot went down this 2-foot hole and completely broke my leg.
Oh.
So at the beginning of shooting that, if you ever have a chance to go back and watch it, or if it runs on Disney Plus or something, I have a broken leg through most of that movie, and you'd never know it.
Wow, I got it's on YouTube. I gotta go back and see now.
You'll see some things, like even when I come running in front of a moving car, I have a broken leg. But we shot everything in a way that maybe now that you know, you'll go, hey, whoa, he's kind of limping. There's some TV trivia for you.
I gotta go check that out now. How was the night court experience?
Loved it. I don't have many experiences that I didn't love because I love to work. Mm-hmm. Night Court was wonderful. Harry was a dream. Margie Post was a dream. Kevin Kelton was a writer.
Did Harry remember?
Yes.
Yeah.
And he couldn't have been kinder. Another sad, tragic loss way too early. And Marky too. But the producers I knew and I've worked with since, and Kevin Kelton, the writer. Just a wonderful experience. See, when TV is done right, when any show is done right, it's when everybody is working communally toward a single purpose with mutual respect. And most shows that are successful run that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I love The Big Picture. I think it's the most underrated of all the Chris Guest movies. Was that a lot of fun to do?
Chris called. Here's a funny story.
Mm-hmm.
Chris called me in and he said, "Hey, I want you to do a part in this." I didn't have to audition. He said, "Oh, here are the lines. You're going to sit between Kevin Bacon, so you're now 2 degrees from Kevin Bacon, in case you're curious, and the other actors and J.T. Walsh was in the scene, and here's your lines, and it was a memorable little scene, but." I just shot it for a day, and afterwards, Chris said, "Hey, you know who I was trying to cast for this, the part of the girl who was an artist? I don't even remember all the cast members. I don't think the wife character, but the part that Jennifer Jason Leigh played."
Right?
Yeah. He said, I brought Julia in, Louis Dreyfus.
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh, she just wasn't any good at all." And I thought, oh, that's too bad. Maybe Julia, as talented as she is, she just isn't going to be seen right by the industry. I remember thinking, oh, my sweet dear friend Julia, she's not being perceived correctly.
Yeah.
I worried for her. Well,
Yeah.
my worries weren't necessary, were they?
No.
She's on the pantheon of all-time greats.
Yeah.
And we all have bad auditions. God knows the bad auditions I've given.
Everyone goes through adversity in their career early on, and then next thing you know, they don't have to worry about it, you know.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm sure she doesn't remember her audition for The Big Picture, but it stuck out to me because I thought, oh, my dear sweet friend Julia, maybe she's just not translating into auditions well or something. Well,
Yeah, it's a very funny movie. I mean, J.T. Walsh, how great was he?
oh my God, yeah. Yeah, and there was room to improvise, but then because Chris is very loose, he doesn't say do it like this, but he might encourage you, do it again, pick up the pace here, stuff like that. And I'll just move the camera. He's always had 2 or 3 cameras going at once so that you could really move quickly. So it was a very enjoyable day of my life.
Yeah. Deadly Weapon.
Deadly Weapon was that was. Well, I'm still friends with Rodney, and I'm friends with lots of people from that. But I don't think I was very good in it. I think it was so low budget. We shot it at night, which is my least favorite thing in the world to do. All I remember is being tired.
I met Rodney at a horror convention. You know, he was famous for playing a mute in the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, right?
Yeah, of course.
Well, I did not know what to expect. That guy, for a guy who was mute in those movies, his voice is loud.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's a personality. He's a character, that guy.
Yeah. Well, we all hung out for a while. Michael Horse was in that.
Oh, yeah.
You know, pre-Twin Peaks and all that stuff. And we were all, you know, it was a very friendly environment for the couple of weeks that I shot with it. But again, not a memorable role and not a particularly memorable movie, although I liked the premise.
Yeah, it's a good premise. The comic strip Live, you were one of the many hosts of that show.
Yes, I believe I was the second of the many hosts, possibly the third of the many hosts. Well, Ken Seisler, who I do a podcast with, the Ken and Gary Show, was the director. And Kenny and I are obviously still very close friends. We have been ever since. But they hired me because they thought, hey, let's not just be a stand-up show. Let's do interstitial sketches. Let's have a host that can introduce comics but also do sketches with the various cast of characters. And I thought, well, that's a pretty neat idea, and it's going to be live. What a great transition after Saturday Night Live. Well, we figured out pretty quickly that the kind of comedy we were doing just wasn't meshing. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it would better today than it did then, but this is 1990, 91. It didn't work. So the reason I was hired to do sketches, they immediately canned after 3 or 4 shows. And as a traffic cop host, because I'm not a stand-up comic, it just didn't work. So they encouraged me to move on after that season. And then they hired a stand-up comic, which was appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, there was Wayne Cotter, Rich Scheidner.
Wayne, yeah.
I think
Wayne followed me, right? Or did I follow Wayne?
I don't know. I don't know the order.
I don't remember.
I think Joe Napodi hosted briefly. Yeah,
Joe did. Yeah.
There's a lot of hosts on that show. I love A Man Called Sarge. I think it's a hilarious and underrated comedy. How did that come to you?
Well, you just moved into the group of my favorite people by saying an underrated comedy. It was actually written and directed by the same guy who directed The Shaggy Dog. Yep. And he knew what a committed leading man I was. And I do believe if you give me the opportunity to be one of your principal characters, I am going to lead by example. I know my lines. I show up on time. I'm in a good mood. I'm friendly to the crew. I mean, I believe that those are the principles that a good leading person, leading actor should be. And by actor, I mean actor or actress. And Stuart Gillard really appreciated that. So he really invited me to do this low-budget film that he had written in Israel. And he put a cast of characters together. And again, we're all still friends. We worked for several months, I think 3 months in Israel, making this comedy film. Stuart allowed us to improvise and all sorts of things. But what happened was, when we got back to the States and they edited the film, somewhere in the process, they decided, hey, we have a good war movie here. Mm-hmm. Better maybe than a comedy. So the comedy became sort of interstitial, and they cut the movie around the action. And after a screening, the cast went, you know what? This doesn't work. You should put the comedy back in and then some. And they saw the light and they put the comedy back in. I still think that they should have gone even further because a lot of improvised bits ended up on the floor. I think if they had gone farther with the comedy, it would have done a little bit better. That was a long way of saying I had a great time. I loved the experience. It wasn't quite the movie I think it could have been, but when anybody like you says, hey, it was kind of a funny film, I enjoyed it, that makes me happy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that you have great chemistry with Gretchen German. I think she's hilarious.
Oh, yes. Hilarious. And Mark Singer.
Yeah.
He was magnificent.
Mark was kind of scheduled to be on here earlier in the year, but I guess something came up and he got busy. But hopefully I'll get him in the future.
And talk about Man Called Sarge, because he was magnificent. I just loved him to death.
It was a very rare comedy role because he does, action stuff and drama. And Jennifer Runyon, I've had her on twice. I love
Jennifer.
She also praised you as a comedy genius.
Oh, she's so good. Well, she's sweet as can be. We all had a crush on Jennifer, but she was engaged to the producer's son, and they've been married for many, many years.
That's right, Roger Corman's nephew.
Yeah. But it was a family. We became family. Andy Bumatai, Bobby DeChico, Howard Busgang. Just a terrific group of people.
It's Bo Jest on acid.
Yeah. You know what? I'm stealing that. I may post the movie and say that Tommy Kovac called it Bo Jest on acid. That's beautiful.
It is. It is. The Radioland Murders.
That was just, Gary, can you come in and do it? Mm-hmm. They said, you are this caveman with a radio show. I read my lines. I was told to run over here. This happens. That. I never ever knew what was going on. I didn't know where I fit into the film. I didn't know what my character was, except that it was someone with a radio show. I didn't know the plot. I didn't understand anything. I worked for a few days, got my check, was flown home, and even now when I watch the movie, I'm still not really sure what happened. Again, nice people. Brian Benben, Mary, you know her name, Masterson.
Mary Stuart Masterson.
Stuart Masterson.
Yeah.
Lovely human being. Great director. George Lucas came in to do second unit.
Yeah, Mel Smith
because
directed.
We were behind schedule.
He was an underrated comedy genius.
Yeah, well, yeah, and but it didn't gel. It didn't come together. And when I watch it, it's so manic. And since I never knew what I was saying or why I was saying it, I can't relate to my performance in any way, shape, or form. I'd say it's the only one where I just went and got the check. But it wasn't really my fault. They never explained it to me. Here, memorize these lines. Stand here. Say them. Okay.
Yeah. Did you see George Burns on set?
I don't recall seeing George Burns, but I saw Michael McKean. I may have seen George Burns. Sometimes some of my memories are just a fog, but I don't believe I saw George.
Yeah. Oh, my God. One of the greats. How that guy never hosted Saturday Night Live, it's beyond me.
Well, he was getting awfully old then, but like you're saying, he still was doing movies even years after. I would be surprised if he wasn't asked. He just might not have wanted to do it.
Maybe because he didn't want to be up all night and all that stuff because it's really hard.
Right. Right.
Yeah, not long after this movie is when he took that fall in his bathtub and he was never the same again, sadly. Right. So I've listened to a few episodes or watched on YouTube of Gary and Kenny, and I watched the one with Robin, and I watched the two you guys did with Brad Hall. So how did that come about that you guys were going to start this show?
COVID and boredom.
Yeah.
I live in Waterloo, Iowa, and Kenny lives in L.A. And at one point we said, hey, we know lots of people. We love to talk. We always make each other laugh. Maybe we can do a show where we just bring on our friends and we talk about show business. Maybe it can even be somewhat of a primer to anyone who wants to break into show business. How did these people create a career? Because we're not going to get big, Tom Hanks isn't going to do our show, but we're going to get good working people. Tim Kazurinsky, Brad, Robin, people who have fashioned lives around show business. And that to me is much more interesting than, how did you become a superstar? No, how do you make a living? How did you break in? How do you balance a healthy life? Those are interesting things. Well, we just started doing it a few years ago because of COVID, and then we're sort of addicted to the idea of getting together and talking to people. The show has ebbed and flowed in terms of what's it about. Are we bringing on a major producer and, like Mark Gordon and talking about how movies are made? Mm-hmm. Well, we more or less said, let's just bring somebody on that we like and let's talk about whatever occurs to us and see where it goes in an hour. Yeah. And so that's really the show now. Yeah,
I like it. It's fun. It really is.
Kenny makes me laugh.
And I seriously think Tom Hanks would do your show because he loves SNL and the whole history and stuff. I really do think that he would do it.
Well, I bet you he would. Our problem, look, I'm out of the business now. Yeah. And Kenny's thing was really, he was Nickelodeon and Disney director for all those years. We don't really have access to getting to the A-listers like Tom, to say, hey, would you do the show? If we did, we certainly would pursue that.
Are you still in politics?
Well, yes and no. I got into politics because I really wanted to be a state representative. I really wanted to be a congressperson. Mm-hmm. It didn't work out, but I was very proud of my campaign. I got a lot of support, but I didn't win. And then I kept the fires burning for a while, thinking, I think I want to get back into it. Well, it's gotten so expensive that all you do when you're running for office is call your friends and have a 2-minute BS conversation and then say, hey, you got $500. It's all you do. Even in a local race, it's going to cost you $200,000 or more. I don't like that. There has to be campaign finance reform. So once I decided that I'm not going into politics again, I decided to just be honest again on social media. Because when you're running for office, you have to be careful of what you say, how you say it. Did I get is my syntax correct? Could I have possibly offended this person or that? Well, that's a very dangerous or a very precarious way to get your ideas and thoughts across when you're always concerned about what's going to be taken out of context. Mm-hmm. Well, I decided I'm not going to go back into politics and I'm just going to be me. So I have an online, even with the Gary and Kenny show, we just say what is on our minds as honestly as we can. And there are probably too many skeletons in my closet now because of that to ever consider running for office. So I think I made that bed, and it's over with.
Is Saturday Night Live the skeleton?
well, I had that skeleton even back then. But, I like using social media not to be dangerous and not to be provocative for the sake of just being provocative, but to put authentic, honest answers and questions out there. Well, anything in this maelstrom of over media saturation can be taken out of context. And I have a family to protect. I have children to protect. I don't want them answering, well, what did your father mean by? So by stepping outside of the arena of being a politician, I can live and breathe more freely and speak my mind more honestly. And I enjoy this. I enjoy being someone trying to hold politicians to the flame, keeping them honest, more, I think, than I would be being an elected official.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, if you ran for president, I'd vote for you.
Bless your heart, Tommy. You really have moved up into the mountain on high of my favorite people. You'd vote for me for president, and you liked A Man Called Sarge.
My pleasure, sir. My pleasure. Have you ever thought about writing a memoir? Because you got great stories.
I have. My wife keeps pressing me. I've started one twice. I keep coming back to, well, who's going to care about me? I'm not Tom Hanks. But my angle would be, should I decide to do it, it doesn't matter. In fact, that's the angle. I'm not Tom Hanks. I made a living. I'm maybe more like you, Mr. or Mrs. Reader, and here are the experiences that I had to get to the place where I am, which I love very much. And I have great stories to tell from getting to A to B to C. That might be an interesting memoir.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's at the point now, and I've learned this from hosting a podcast the last 6 years. Everyone's writing a book now. Everyone's telling their story, And on paper, you think to yourself, is anyone really going to care about this? But then when you actually hear the inside details, it's like, wow, this story needs to be told,
Yeah. So I am playing with it, and I thank you for stirring that pot a little bit, because it just might be what motivates me tomorrow.
Awesome. So the Gary Kenny Show is available on YouTube and all the podcast platforms. How often do you drop episodes?
Well, we sort of take the summer off. We at least took August off, and we're just putting on some old ones. We try to drop one twice a month. We are also on DBTV, which is streaming on Roku, but they only require a show once a month from us. So there's a backlog of our shows. Sometimes it's willy-nilly. You're much more disciplined than we are. It's like we'll do 2 in a week, and then we won't do any for a month.
Yeah, and you guys do the seasonal thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I made a couple attempts to do it, and I got bored and complacent. I may make one more attempt next year, because they say the third time's the charm.
Okay. Fair enough. I don't know where third time's a charm ever came from, but people use it a lot. I'm on my third marriage. It's the charm. Trust me.
Yeah, it comes in threes, just like when people die. It comes in threes.
Yeah, right. Good threes, bad threes, yes, but in threes.
Gary,
balance of the universe.
Gary, once again, this has been a tremendous honor. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing all these great stories, and I hope you have a great rest of your summer, and be safe out there.
Tommy, thank you for asking me. You said it was an honor. Well, the honor is mine. To be asked that anyone cares and lets me tell these old stories is a thrill for me. So thank you. Thank you for reaching out.
Absolutely, sir. You have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Well, there you have it. Gary Kroeger. Ain't he a cool dude? Oh, what a nice guy, huh? I mean, Ian was right. He is a mensch, just a sweetheart. And I'm so glad that we could have this conversation today about old Saturday Night Live and everything else. Well, until next time, this is Tommy Throwback Kovac saying there's no shame in living in the past, because the present sucks. Later, dudes.